Good morning and good afternoon. Now allow me to begin 2022 Women in Engineering Day WISET Expert Group Meeting on Bridging the Gender Gap in Engineering. Again, good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished participants who are attending today's forum, both online and offline. My name is Hyunju Lee from WISET. I'm your MC for today. Thank you all for coming to attend today's forum. Today's forum is hosted by Korea Foundation for Women in Science, Engineering and Technology and sponsored by the Ministry of Science and ICT, the Asia Foundation and INWED. On the occasion of 2022 Women in Engineering Day, we will explore ways to nurture female talents and bridge the gender gap in engineering. Please stay with us for this significant forum until the very end. Today's event is being held while taking precautions to prevent the spread of COVID-19, and the event is being live streamed on YouTube. Given that this forum is held online with only a few participants joining in person, I would like to skip the introductions of our guests. Let me once again thank you for attending today's meeting despite your busy schedule. Now let me invite President An Hye-yeon from WISET for her opening remarks. Please give her a big hand. Good morning and good afternoon. As introduced, I am An Hye-yeon, the President of Korea Foundation for Women in Science, Engineering and Technology. I am delighted to hold WISET Expert Group Meeting on the celebration of 2022 Women in Engineering Day. I would like to thank distinguished participants as well as Representative Kim Sang-hee and Senior Director Jane Sloan for their congratulatory remarks. Above all, I would like to thank Professor Andrew Majov, Professor Hwang Sun-hee, and other panelists for sharing your insights today. Recently, there is high interest in nurturing female talent in engineering and utilizing their talent. With rapid development in technologies and the pandemic and weather abnormalities, all industries required science and technology talent equipped with scientific thinking and technology skills. And to boost our national competitiveness, expanding the gender diversity is a key issue. The US, the UK, and other science and advanced technologies, advanced nations are paying high attention to the STEM areas to improve their diversity and inclusiveness as a national strategy. Bridging the gender gap in engineering and resolving the issue of underrepresentation of women in engineering have a long way to go despite the various efforts made so far. And especially only few women go into the engineering field. When you look at the 2020 enrollment of college in South Korea, only 10.9% of the female students choose the engineering field, while their male counterparts choose the engineering field at the rate of 40.8%. Given that we are in an absolute shortage of technical talent, I believe more women can go on to study in the engineering field. New technologies and new industries require more talent. To respond to those needs, we need to grow and attract more women in engineering. Given this issue, I think this forum is very relevant. And as a woman in engineering, I myself find today's topic highly relatable. And I hope today's forum can be an opportunity to not only find consensus on this issue, but also to find practical solutions to bridge the gender gap in engineering and grow female talent in engineering. I would like to thank the Ministry of Science and ICT and the Asia Foundation for sponsoring today's forum. Our foundation will also do our best to help more women in engineering grow and thrive in their field. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your remarks. Now, allow me to invite Representative Kim Sang-hee for her congratulatory remarks. Please give her a big hand.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kim Sang-hee, member of the National Assembly. First of all, I'd like to congratulate on hosting the expert forum on the occasion of International Women in Engineering Day 2022. I would like to express my gratitude to Minister of Science and ICT Lee Jong-ho and President An Hae-yeon of WISET for organizing today's forum. Also, in order to share valuable vision and wisdom, Dr. Andrew Mazoff of Institute for Learning and Brain Science, University of Washington, and Professor Hwang Sun-hee of Hongik University, and many experts are joining this occasion. Thank you so much. Women in Engineering Day is a festivity to celebrate the achievement of women engineers. Despite the harsh situation where women account for only 10% of the total industrial and technical workforce, women are doing their best as engineers in their respective field. The problem is that women are underrepresented, and the gender imbalance is very serious in science and technology field, especially engineering field. We need to change the overall research environments, including the problem of unequal manpower structure and career interruption experienced by women. For my part, I propose the Act on Fostering and Supporting Women Scientists and Engineers to improve work-life balance and working environments. It is expected to be passed at the National Assembly in the second half of this year. I hope that today's forum will be the place to think more deeply about the problem of women workers in the engineering field so we can find fundamental solutions. I hope that your valuable suggestions can be reflected in policy and excellent women human resources in science and engineering can be established as a national core workforce. Thank you. Well, thank you, Kim Sang-hee, for your remarks. And we are going to invite the Jane Sloan from ASEAN Foundation.
Good morning. I'm thrilled to welcome you to this timely and vital dialogue on fostering female talent and closing the gender gap in engineering while commemorating Women in Engineering Day. The Asia Foundation is delighted to be partnering with the Korean Foundation for Women in Science, Technology and Engineering and the Republic of Korea Ministry of Science and ICT. We're committed to ensuring more girls and women have opportunities to pursue STEM careers, including as leaders in engineering. In 2020, the Asia Foundation organised a Women and STEM trilateral, supported by the US State Department in cooperation with the South Korean and Japanese governments and non-government organisations. Recognising the power of building connections among pioneering women in STEM fields, we released a study in 2021 on women's STEM networks in Asia with support from Zendesk, an American software company. We now have a growing portfolio of programs across the region that are helping women to pursue STEM careers. And this includes girls' scholarships, supporting women entrepreneurs to harness new technologies, and connecting women in STEM fields with peers across the region. Through our Future Skills Alliance program, we're also increasing digital literacy and providing women who are returning to the workforce with market-driven upskilling. We know that access to education, mentors, coaches, training, positive role models, and inclusive workplace cultures with positive gender norms all play significant roles in closing the gender gap in engineering and other STEM fields. We also know the value of women in STEM networks are a critical part of supportive ecosystems for women in STEM fields, and we're committed to strengthening networks for women in engineering fields in Asia. This convening provides an opportunity to highlight the issues, best practices, and imperatives for building a gender-inclusive engineering workforce for the future. With the COVID-19 pandemic further eroding women's economic participation, we must double down to ensure that we don't lose valuable gains made to close the gender gap in engineering. The time is now, and this convening will make an important contribution to charting a path forward. Thank you so much for your participation.
네, 제인슬런 선임국장님 감사드립니다.
Thank you for your
이어서
remarks.
발제가 있겠습니다.
Now let me move on to the presentations. For the first session, Ms. Kristina Kamarodin, consultant from Asia Foundation, will moderate the presentations by Professor Andrew Medrup from Washington University and Professor Hwang Soon-hee from Hongik University. Ms. Kristina Kamarodin is a consultant in the Asian Foundation with lots of experiences of participating in women's capacity building programs. And recently, she's been part of the Pan Asian STEM network to connect and strengthen women in STEM networks through STEM Connect Her initiative. Ms. Kristina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's wonderful to be part of this event and this discussion. And today I have the pleasure of moderating the first session of our meeting today, which aims to examine the gender differences in STEM and its implication for fostering female talents in engineering. This session will discuss the factors contributing to gender differences in STEM career choice and academic continuity, as well as ways in which these disparities could be addressed. And to speak on this, we have two esteemed speakers that I now have the pleasure to introduce. Our first speaker, Dr. Andrew Meltzoff, who will share with us his research on gender stereotypes and gender differences in the STEM field. Dr. Meltzoff holds the Job and Gertrude Tamaki Endowed Chair at the University of Washington and is the co-director of the Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences. He received his BA from Harvard and PhD from Oxford. Dr. Meltzoff is an internationally renowned pioneer in developmental psychology. His research demonstrates that societal stereotypes about women and STEM begin to influence children as early as the first grade and throughout their academic careers. Based on science, he is a proponent for educational equity. He is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and received the William James Award, the highest honor bestowed by the Association of Psychological Science in the USA. And with that, Dr. Meltzoff, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for those kind words. And I also would like to thank Dr. Ahn and others for inviting me today. I first met Dr. Ahn, I think, at a UNESCO event in 2019, which was in fact in Korea. And we had a very interesting conversation about this very topic that we're speaking about today. So I'm honored to be invited today, and I look forward to the proceedings. What I'm going to talk about are how societal stereotypes contribute to gender disparities in engineering. I'm a psychologist, and I tend to study children and adults about psychological things. And I think when I talk about how young children are affected, I think it may connect to some of the people here. First point I want to make is that not all STEM disciplines are actually the same. There's larger gaps in some disciplines than others in gender representation, as many of you know. If we take, for instance, the biological sciences, which are a STEM science, there's this is in the United States statistics, but about 59% of the undergraduate degrees are awarded to females in biological science. So that field is very well represented. Chemistry is well represented, a little lower, but reasonably well. It's computer science and engineering that are among the lowest, where only about 20% of the undergraduate degrees in the United States are given in those fields to women, and that means the other 80% are for men. So those are the fields that we want to talk about today. And why this matters, as many of you in the room know, is that it means that some women are missing out on flexible, high-paying, and high-status jobs. But it also means that society is missing out on the potential novel contributions that women would make. And we can look through the history of engineering design and see that. In early designs of airbags for cars, they were designed more for large men than women and children, and that had an impact and then had to be changed. Speech recognition programs in the very beginning were tuned to recognize male speech better than female speech, and even today, some artificial hearts are designed more for male bodies than for female bodies, and we can only think that having a more diverse workforce and women in the room when these engineering designs were being decided upon would be helpful. My chief concern and the concern of my colleagues are what are the origins of these disparities? And what we've located is that societal factors such as stereotypes play quite a significant role. That's what I'd like to talk about today. There are very strong societal stereotypes, these are only stereotypes, that women have lower ability or less interest in computer science and engineering than men do. These stereotypes influence both adults and children, and I am quite concerned about the especially powerful effect they have on young children because the stereotypes can influence the interests and educational pathways of these young children as early as elementary school and all through development. So it's something we need to pay attention to. What is a stereotype then? Well, psychologists think of it as a widely shared belief linking a social group, such as women, to a trait, characteristic, or academic discipline. So, for example, engineering is for men is a stereotype. My colleagues and I have done research with children, and we've been quite interested in how early on in their schooling do young children catch the stereotype that is so prominent in many societies around the world. You know, the children aren't born with this stereotype, they're bathed in the stereotype exhibited by adults. We tested in this study, recently published studies in the Proceeding of the National Academy of Sciences. We studied 2,000 children between 1st and 12th grade, and we tested when they began to endorse the stereotype, for instance, that engineering is for boys or computer science is for boys. And what we found was quite interesting. On this graph of results, the 0 line would be being neutral with respect to this, that engineering was just as much for boys as for girls. Positive values shown on this graph means that the children have the stereotype and associate computer science and engineering with boys. As you can see on the left-hand side of this graph, which is the computer science side, children, both girls and boys, were highly stereotyped, significantly stereotyped, thinking that computer science went more with boys than with girls, and the boys held that stereotype especially strongly. If you look on the right-hand side of the graph, it was the stereotypes about engineering, and we found the same pattern, but the stereotype about engineering were even stronger. I want to break down with you what we found across age from 1st to 12th grade. Computer science is on the left, and what you can see there is by 3rd grade, children already endorsed the stereotype that computer science was more for boys than for girls. On the right-hand side, you can see for engineering, it's much stronger, and that as early as 1st grade, children already have caught the stereotype. Now, we discovered that there were actually 2 sorts of stereotypes that are often confused in the literature, and it's very, very helpful to separate them. One is what we call a gender interest stereotype. That is the stereotype that girls or women are less interested in engineering than men are. And the other is a gender ability stereotype. This is the stereotype that women and girls are not as good at engineering or computer science as men or boys are. And we found that the interest stereotype was even stronger at every age than the ability stereotype. That is, that some girls could think, you know, I have a good ability in engineering or computer science, I'm as good as the boys, but there's this interest stereotype that society holds that maybe she's good at it, but girls as a whole just are not interested in this discipline. Of course, that's a stereotype, not true, but it is held very, very strongly by adults, and we now see here even by little girls. And we think these interest stereotypes are particularly powerful and meaningful because it can change girls' notion of themselves and how much they think they belong in this field. What we found in this study was that the stronger an individual girl endorsed the stereotype that engineering is for boys, the less she felt that she belonged in the field when we did psychological tests about that, and the less she wanted to pursue it. Now, we're quite aware that the results that I talked about so far are merely correlational, and we, after doing those studies with large N's, we wanted to do an experiment where we could actually investigate the causal power of what it means for a stereotype to be introduced on a neutral activity. So we actually set up an experiment where we could do random assignments to get at causality. And here we tested 8 and 9-year-old girls, and each child was shown 2 folders. They were shown a folder with computer science activities. One of them said reducing activity, and the other said searching activity. And we ran, there were papers in those folders. The children did not see what was in there, but we randomly assigned a stereotype to one of the folders and not the other. So for instance, the children might be told, you see this reducing activity? Girls are less interested in this activity than boys. But on the searching activity, girls and boys are equally interested in this. So we randomly assigned a stereotype, and then we measured the children's interest, sense of belonging, and behavioral choice. And all 3 of those for girls were significant. The girls said that they were less interested in the stereotyped activity than the non-stereotyped one. They said they would belong less well with other people who did that activity, the searching activity. And most importantly of all, afterwards, when we gave the children the 2 folders, which they had not looked inside of yet, and we said, which would you like to take home and do this activity? The girls, 65% of the girls looked back and forth between the 2 folders and then selected the non-stereotype activity to take home and play with. We think this is very important because just the introduction of the stereotype drives some of the girls away from wanting to do that activity, and they want to take the behavioral choice of the one that was non-stereotype. So what can we do about this? Well, we designed 2 interventions to see if we could increase interest and engagement in computer science and engineering. And I want to tell you a little bit briefly about this. We gave very young girls early technology experience, and we also, in a different study, made STEM more social. Here's the first intervention where we gave children experience programming on a little cell phone in our laboratory. These were 6-year-old girls. We showed them how to program on a cell phone, how to move this little robot along a tiled path. Some were simple paths and some were more complex paths, where they actually had to program in, move 2 tiles forward, then make a left-hand turn and move forward and so forth. The very interesting thing is when these 6-year-olds were given technology experience, this is a little girl, she's going to program in how to make the robot move, and you're going to see how excited she was. She uses an American phrase and says, oh, this is cool, this is so cool. So let the girl show you in just a 10-second film how she reacted.
Cool. Oh my God, that was super.
She was very excited about this experience. Whoops, sorry. And what I want to talk about then is we measured things after the girls and the boys had this experience. And what we found is before the girls had robot experience, when we asked them, how good are you at robots? They said they really weren't very good at it. We measured boys, they said they were good at. There was a significant difference at baseline between what the girls and boys thought about robots. Boys thought they were better at it than girls. Boys thought that robots were more fun than girls. They had more confidence in manipulating robots and so forth. But after our intervention program, we were able to show that girls reported that they thought they were very good at robots now. In fact, there was no significant difference after our intervention between how good the girls thought they were and how good the boys thought they were. Girls thought that it was equally fun and so forth. So that's one interesting intervention. Then we had another one to make STEM more social, which we brought to an even younger age, 4.5-year-old children. And here we told the children that they were a member of a group. And so in the experimental room, this is a 4.5-year-old girl, we had pictures on the wall of other peers that same age wearing green t-shirts, and we told them the green team plays spatial puzzles. They like spatial puzzles. And then we would give the girl, we would randomly assign, of course, we would give the child a green t-shirt. They'd sit at a green table with a green flag, and we'd give them spatial puzzles or math puzzles to play with. And what we found when we measured this is that the girls and the boys, when they were on the green team, which was supposedly a team that liked puzzles, the children did significantly better. They put together the puzzle in a faster period of time. They got more pieces of the puzzle right. They reported that they were more interested in it. And even when they made mistakes and couldn't get the pieces in the puzzle, they persisted significantly longer when they were part of a team versus not. So we think that it could be relevant for schooling to help make STEM more social. So this brings us then to 3 action steps that we can take for society, not just for the children, but for society. We think we want to increase scientific research on gender disparities. Second, change popular images of computer science and engineering. And third, raise awareness about stereotypes in society. So on step 1, in our lab and in many labs around the world, there are increasingly papers coming out about the effect that stereotypes have on the workforce, on college students, graduate students, but even increasingly here early in the pipeline, before girls are having aspirations for joining these careers, the stereotypes are affecting them. So our PNAS paper is in the lower right, and another paper that we did on high school women was about a sense of belonging in the field. And these 2 publications may interest some of the people in this audience. Another thing we need to do, the second point I wanted to make, was that we need to change stereotypes about computer science and engineering in society. And here we think there are 3 classes of stereotypes that are particularly important. The first is a widely held stereotype. It's not true, of course, but it's a stereotype that the people in these disciplines are sort of socially isolated and narrowly focused on tech, maybe socially awkward, don't like to interact with others. That's just a stereotype, but it drives some young children away from it. We need to change that stereotype and help to get the message out about it. The second type of stereotype that we found makes a difference were stereotypes about the work itself. You know, legal profession and medicine have the stereotype of being helpful fields, that you can help others, and other fields are collaborative. But many people, just a stereotype, think of computer science as being not collaborative, lone work that an isolated person does in the room. And that drives some children and high school students away from these disciplines, when the reality is it can be highly collaborative, and it is a helping profession to help others. We need to communicate that to change stereotypes. And the third, very briefly, are stereotypes that are held about the values, norms, or habits in the field. Some people have this stereotype that people in these disciplines continuously play computer games at all hours of the night, or maybe are born geniuses, natural programmers, or so forth. And therefore think of the field as not for me. But we think we can broaden the idea of what the field is actually like. So this then brings the third point I wanted to make, that we need to raise public awareness more generally in teachers, policymakers, students, universities, about gender inequalities and stereotypes. And toward that end, our institute here at the University of Washington has some free modules. These are little 10-minute information movies that have a lot of data, such as the data I'm talking about today, and some movies in it on high school kids and elementary school children in STEM. Some of these may be of interest to you. For instance, what we call Module 19 there in that top row is about early STEM learning. And the one on the bottom right is about self-confidence, self-esteem, and so forth. So I put this up here because in America, many government agencies, schools, and foundations are tapping these resources. And of course, it's totally for free. And I wanted to share this with you. Lastly, then, last slide, in the interest of time, I simply have 7 points I want to take home messages. Adult stereotypes influence our children. That starts as early as first grade, shockingly. Stereotypes drive some women, some girls, not all, away from computer science and engineering. Teachers, parents, and the media spread these stereotypes. Fifth, we should provide our children with more realistic and diverse pictures of who does computer science and engineering. Six, we can design programs to help young children resist and overcome these societal stereotypes. And lastly, we need to start early if we want to bring more girls and women into the pipeline from the very beginning. So thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Dr. Meltzoff, for sharing the interesting findings of your research. And our second speaker for today, Dr. Hwang Seung-hee, will share with us her research on gender characteristics of engineering students and factors that cause these gender differences. Dr. Hwang is an assistant professor in the Department of Liberal Arts and Science at Hongik University in Korea. She received her BA from Yuhua Women's University, her master's degree from Université de Rouen, and her PhD from Université Paris in France. She serves as an editor of the Journal of Engineering Education Research, Korean Society for Engineering Education, and is a former vice director of the Center for Teaching and Learning, or CTL, at Hongik University. Her current research interests include women in engineering, creativity and convergence education for engineering students, as well as communication education. She received the 2017 KSEE Best Paper Award and the 2017 Best Presentation Award by Korean Society for Engineering Education. And with that, Dr. Hwang, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me well? Okay. I am honored to present at the expert group meeting on the occasion of 2022 International Women in Engineering Day. As introduced, my name is Sun-hee Hwang, professor at Hongik University. So I would like to present 3 parts. And the first part of my presentation is about the surging demand for STEM workforce and shortages of talent. And this means fostering women in engineering and utilizing their talent has become necessary and various efforts have been made. However, when you look at the employment rate of STEM graduates, you can see a huge gender gap, and there are many previous research on this. But because of the time constraints, I would like to look at only a few of them. And the second part I want to talk about today has to do with challenges faced by women in engineering majors. This is attributable to gender differences. Based on my observations, I think such claim is correct. And I would also like to look at not only the gender differences, but also the differences between engineering majors and non-engineering majors, because the engineering majors have some characteristics unique to them compared compared to non-engineering majors. So I would like to look at a few studies results because of the time constraint today. And lastly, I'd like to talk about the implications for fostering women in engineering and STEM. As I said earlier, recently there is a shortage of a STEM workforce as well as a surging demand for such workforce. That is why various efforts have been made to help women pursue STEM careers, but still women are underrepresented in those fields. Engineering has long been male-dominated field, and the education curriculum and culture provide a chilly climate to female students. These environmental factors make it difficult for women to major in STEM fields. And even after admission, female students face challenges in adjusting to school life, finding career pathways, and are highly likely to drop out. And in addition, there are multiple career barriers to women in engineering. I think the same is the case in South Korea. I looked at the statistics in 2019, and it turned out that only 21.5% of workforce in STEM are female. This figure is quite low, even though the employment rate of the STEM graduates are quite high. Women in engineering often experience a variety of challenges, and they often feel that they are not good enough for the field of engineering and they do not belong in this field. If the audience today has not experienced this feeling, it is a good thing. However, the previous studies I looked at show that many female students in engineering feel that they do not belong in here and they are not good enough for engineering. This leads to low self-efficacy, lower academic engagement, and low self-esteem in overall. In addition, this leads to higher levels of emotional exhaustion or burnout, and female students in engineering end up feeling negative impacts in terms of well-being. So I want to ask our female engineering students, are you happy and are you confident about your choice of major? Unfortunately, a lot of previous research says otherwise. Let me share some research for better understanding. A lot of research describes this phenomenon using the term gender differences. A lot of research shows that in terms of math and spatial abilities, there is a gender gap with males outperforming females. Also, in terms of confidence, women tend to report lower confidence in their measure than men, and this leads to an impact on their accomplishments in the measures and whether they continue their measures. However, there are a couple of research that tells otherwise. For example, one study said that there is no gender difference in terms of their abilities related to their major. But interestingly, even well-performing female students in engineering feel that they are anxious and they feel uncomfortable about their major. And the major cause of that is that they lack various experiences which are required to thrive in the field of engineering. And as a result, as female students are planning to prepare for their graduation, many of them choose other fields rather than going on to get a job in their own field. I think that does not stem from the intrinsic gender gap in their abilities. I think this is because of the self-efficacy in their major. Now, I would like to talk about a few points based on my own research as well as some previous research I looked at. The research on the difference between men and women in engineering and the difference between engineering majors and non-engineering majors. But because of the time constraints, I'd like to focus on only a few of them. Engineering male students seem to show higher everyday creativity, psychological well-being, engineering self-efficacy, major satisfaction than men. So women undergraduates in engineering scored lower in those fields than men. They can be measured in terms of psychological factors and other variables. When it comes to psychological factor, psychological well-being means the state of happiness, the happiness they feel about doing their work and finishing their assignments. There are a lot of research about psychological well-being. A lot of studies about psychological well-being says that female undergraduates show higher scores than male students in terms of psychological well-being. However, this is not the case for women in engineering. Also, women undergraduates in engineering scored higher than men in empathy. And also in terms of spatial abilities, women and undergraduates in, empathy, women undergraduates in engineering scored higher than men. But I'm not sure whether this is because of the major, because overall women seem to score higher than men in empathy. Let me now move on to the next slide. I would like to look at the characteristics of women undergraduates in engineering field and non-engineering fields. Shows that in everyday creativity, men and women undergraduates in engineering scored lower than their counterparts in non-engineering fields. Also, everyday creativity is actually not just the creativity specially needed for a certain field. Actually, everyday creativity is more of a general concept of creativity that is required for your everyday life. And the study shows that men and women undergraduates in engineering shows lower everyday creativity than their non-engineering counterparts. And when it comes to communicative competencies and speaking abilities, engineering students were significantly lower than those of other majors. And of course, there are several measures. One measure can be the scores you get after taking a test, and the other measure is your perception about yourself. For example, I am good at writing or I am good at speaking. This can be your self-perception. And those two measures were both looked at, and I looked at the previous research on that, and I found that on those two measures, male and female engineering students scored lower than their non-engineering counterparts. Also, women undergraduates in engineering showed lower psychological well-being and self-leadership than their counterparts in non-engineering fields. For your information, those in education college showed higher self-leadership. I think this is a topic for ongoing research, so I'm still thinking about how to interpret this result. Also, when it comes to major satisfaction, actually women undergraduates in engineering showed higher scores. I think there is a reason for that. Major satisfaction literally means your self-satisfaction in your major. After admitting to the college, you choose a major. And as you know, engineering field provides more employment opportunities than other than non-engineering fields. Maybe that is why women have higher major satisfaction than non-engineering students. And I would like to show the results of a study I published last year, which dealt with psychological well-being, engineering self-efficacy, and major satisfaction, and the relationship among those variables. There was a close correlation between those variables. Engineering self-efficacy has to do with various aspects of self-efficacy that is required for engineering. And then I also looked at major satisfaction. If you have higher psychological well-being, I found out that you have higher engineering self-efficacy, and this also leads to higher major satisfaction. And I looked at the study, and I found out that the psychological well-being has a considerable effect on engineering self-efficacy and major satisfaction. And one sub variable of psychological well-being is environmental mastery, which turned out to have the greatest impact on other variables. Environmental mastery has to do with resolving the surroundings if you face any challenges in your surroundings. And in terms of the ability to improve your surrounding, it turns out that women undergraduates in engineering have lower abilities in that. That is maybe because the surroundings and the environment in engineering are given. Now let me look at some of the implications. For starters, I think various efforts are required to improve engineering self-efficacy and major satisfaction of women in engineering. I think it is also necessary to help women undergraduates in engineering to improve their attitudes as a whole. I think repeated experiences of success are very important. For example, if you excelled in one subject or if you scored high in your math test, you will feel a sense of accomplishment, and that can lead to higher engineering self-efficacy and major satisfaction. And not only the subjects that are centered on your major, but also other subjects are important, such as the programs provided by the college themselves. I think we need to utilize those subjects that are not centered on the major as well. Next, we need to look into a contextual specificity of the engineering college. We need to consider the specific context of engineering in improving the educational content and curriculum of engineering, given that there is a characteristic of the engineering. So today I looked at the engineering student characteristics. So I think taking into account those characteristics can go a long way to improve the overall curriculum. Lastly, there are differences between men and women engineering students, as I explained earlier, but I think those differences come from the psychological factors and other social factors. They do not come from cognitive abilities and the gender difference in the cognitive ability. I think another thing to point out is that it's important to have a role model for women engineering students. When they have a role model in their own field and can get support from those role models, they are more likely to retain their major. I think providing such role models can help lower the rate of women who go on to choose other majors than their own majors. And from these results, it can be deduced that failure of women students' persistence in their majors is not due to academic or major-related abilities, but related to psychological and social factors. Many studies have been conducted regarding this issue, especially about the employment rate of female engineering students as well as their adaptation to school life. And I think such topics are very important. And in addition, I also talked about psychological factors and the specific environment of engineering that poses challenges to females, and this calls for further research. The efforts to grow female talent in engineering is not just for women undergraduates in engineering. At the moment, the engineering field is quite male-dominated. However, if we need to improve this surrounding and make it more inclusive so that men and women can grow together. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Huang, and thank you to both our speakers for sharing their findings of the research today. In this first session, we have explored the power of gendered stereotypes and how it has resulted in STEM as a career choice for women. Dr. Meltzow shared the differences between gender interest and gender ability stereotype and how that shapes girls' notion of themselves and how they feel they belong in this field. And how can we change these outcomes? Interventions, as Dr. Meltzow mentioned, needs to happen in early childhood development, at least as these societal stereotypes affect children as early as the first grade. And Dr. Huang then shares, while there are differences between men and women in engineering students, there's actually no difference in the cognitive ability between the two genders in engineering. And so it is important to build an environment of psychological well-being and positive self-perception of girls and pursuing a major in engineering. And so with that, I will now pass the floor to our Master of Ceremony to further unpack this topic and continue with this important discussion. Thank you very much.
So before we have our panel discussions, we are going to have a short break, and we are going to resume at 10 a.m. Korean time.
Good morning again. Let me now begin the expert panel discussion. I will be moderating the panel discussion and participate as a panelist, and I will now briefly introduce the panelists in the order they will speak. Please refer to the meeting materials for more information on the panelist. First, Ms. Abby Block, Senior Software Engineer at Google. Professor Oh Myung-soo, and the President of the Association of Women in Science, Engineering and Technology. Ms. Chae Young-shin, the co-founder and CEO of NAMU. And Associate Professor Lee Hyun-chu from KAIST. And Principal Professional Jung So-hyun from Samsung Electronics. Yeah, I think she hasn't joined yet, so she will join shortly. And we also have Professor Andrew Majorp from Washington University. And our last panelist is Professor Hwang Sun-hee from Konkuk University, Department of Liberal Arts and Science. So this is the order that the panelists will speak. So I'd like to ask our panelists in this order to speak.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted to be here. And I'm here to speak not as an academic expert, but to share my personal experience as a woman engineer in industry. As that kind introduction said, I am a senior software engineer at Google. I've been at Google for 7 years, and I've been an engineer for about 15. I am leading a team of engineers, and we integrate with external partners to help Google verify users' identities. So for instance, we've integrated with a Korean company that allows users to verify their names, addresses, and citizenship statuses using their cell phone records, which is pretty neat. At this point in my career, I am growing toward positions of leadership and management, which is deeply exciting, and I'm able to be a leader in ways that I never imagined for myself when I was young. And on top of that, I'm always learning new things, which is fantastic. This topic is very important to me, this topic of stereotypes and women in engineering, because I almost fell victim myself to all of the stereotypes that the two doctors explained to us earlier. And I almost missed out on this fantastic career. I did not study computer science when I was in university, in spite of plenty of talent and plenty of opportunity, and plenty of role models on top of that. I am self-taught in coding and computer science. I learned on the job, and I'm happy to have done so, but it's a hard way to enter the industry. So students who are studying computer science have a leg up on me for sure. Looking back at my college years, I simply never thought of computer science as something that I would enjoy or be able to do. And that's even though I had two parents, both my mother and my father were computer engineers. So I had role models. And I studied mathematics at my university with honors. So I had plenty of scientific ability. I didn't discover computer science until my senior year when I had to take an introductory computer science course to satisfy my degree requirements. In the process of taking this class very late, I discovered that computer science was fun and rewarding and also accessible. And I'm so glad that I did, because my career in computers has been satisfying and financially rewarding and very interesting. So I think about why. Why did it take me so long to figure out that this might be a path that I wanted to take? And it's every single one of those stereotypes that Dr. Meltzoff listed. I had the impression that the computer science students in my university went into this major knowing everything, and that there was no way to start from the beginning. And clearly that's not true. In industry especially, there are so many things to learn, so many technologies and languages. No one human can possibly know them all. Everyone is learning all the time. So certainly I think that the world would be a better place for women if we cultivated the idea that it's all right to be a beginner, bringing a beginner spirit to learning is a good thing to do. And it's okay, especially in computers, not to know everything. And I'm very happy that we have such wonderful scientists thinking of ways to help us do so. Interestingly, though, these stereotypes don't disappear after university. So the belief that an engineer is someone who knows everything, who doesn't need to ask questions, and who sits in a corner and works in isolation, I see these reflected in many aspects of my work life, particularly around things like hiring, performance reviews, and promotions. And these are all really important moments in a worker's career. And they're all places where we're deciding who's worth investing in, who is likely to be a high achiever, whom do we mentor, and to whom do we give opportunities. And what I observe in the workplace is we have a default tendency to invest in engineers who fit the mold, namely those big brain know-it-alls. And that has some very unfortunate effects for everybody. When we reward a certain set of behaviors, we suppress others. So this idea of what a good engineer looks like discourages people from showing vulnerability by asking questions, and it suppresses learning, which again is such an important part of the job. The good thing is that over the years, I've come to believe that this isn't malicious. The fact that we default to liking people who are like other good engineers. I think it boils down to the fact that none of us in industry is good at measuring excellence or predicting future performance or future achievement. It's not a solved problem, and we don't know how to do it. So in the absence of a way to measure excellence, we fall back on stereotypes. We effectively are measuring in our performance reviews how similar is this person to other high-performing engineers? It's unfortunately not necessarily about how one shows up in the workplace, the collaboration one leads, or what one actually produces, but instead, how much do they adhere to the stereotypes? So what I want young engineers to know, especially young women engineers, is that there are many types of excellence and many ways to be an excellent engineer. In my career, all of the ways that I'm different, the ways that I think differently, the differences in my academic background, the different ways that I present and interact with people, these have all become strengths in my career. And the other thing I would like to impart to you is I hope that you can cultivate a healthy sense of skepticism if anyone ever implies, or if you ever feel about yourself, that you're not cut out to be an engineer. Because, of course, when we look at the data, we find that women in the sciences consistently underestimate their own abilities, whereas men in the sciences consistently overestimate theirs. No one, not even yourself, can predict with any accuracy what you will achieve in your career. And from my years of experience, my opinion is this. What it takes, the single most important trait of a good engineer is persistence. That is the ability to continue engaging with a problem you don't yet understand. So if you don't feel like you know everything, that's good. Keep working and studying anyway, and be prepared to learn your whole career long. We need you.
Thank you. That was oh yeah, there's a yeah, that's really great. Yeah, the confidence and believing in yourself is very important. Thank you, Abby. So the next speaker will be 오명수 회장님. 진행해줘요. 영어 섞어서.
네, 안녕하세요. 여성가총의 오명숙입니다.
Our next speaker is the President O. I actually have prepared some materials, so you can refer to the meeting materials in front of you, and I will put up the presentation materials on the screen as well. I'd like to talk about the chilly climate, and I'd like to link this topic to the issues in engineering education. For starters, let me elaborate on the chilly climate. So what is the chilly climate? Many engineering professors would wonder what this means, so I prepared some examples. What is the chilly climate in teamwork? There is a sort of formula in Korea that the team leader should be male. Actually, in Korea, age hierarchy is more important than the gender. since male undergraduates usually went on to be enlisted in the military service and then came back to college, they tend to be older than their female counterparts, so they tend to take on the role of team leader. When I looked at the research, it turns out that males tend to do more technical work, while females plan meetings, conduct literature searches, and prepare reports and PPTs. And maybe that is why the contribution of female students is undervalued in team projects. This or can show the chilly climate toward women. Why does this matter? This is because this has to do with lack of sense of belonging for female students, and this can be an impedance for students' learning. Also, it has to do with a low retention rate for female students. It's not that female students change their majors before graduation, but rather after graduation, they tend to choose the majors that are different from their own majors. Also, we can talk about aspirations for their majors and self-efficacy, which also were mentioned by the previous speaker in the presentation. This study shows that in the freshman year, the academic aspiration and self-efficacy show no difference between genders. However, as you go up into higher grades, there is a gender gap. I think this is because of the chilly climate in engineering education. Then how can we make this climate more inclusive? For starters, we need to make conscious efforts to correct unconscious bias and also discrimination, and we should be aware of our gender stereotypes and try to fix those stereotypes. Also, we need a support program for women. And when it comes to education, I think we need a gender-inclusive classroom, which means making education more inclusive to women. We need to include educational content that can be relatable to women. And if there are any stereotypes embedded in the educational content, we need to try to eliminate them. We should also show our expectations of women, and the educational content should be developed in a way that motivates women. So I want to talk more about how to motivate female students. To better motivate female students, I think a work value frame is very important. According to research, female students tend to focus more on social values. So doing engineering that can do good for society can motivate female students. This is an example I used a lot. The example of penicillin can be a good content. So for the mass production of penicillin, a lot of efforts have been made, and after war and before war, the development of antibiotics and penicillin has had a huge impact. In addition, the mass production can be attributed to Margaret Hutchison, who is the so-called first generation chemical engineer, female chemical engineer. And another example is a project, a bridge design in the civil engineering. So there is this bridge design in Seoul, and this bridge was designed in a very eco-friendly way, and it uses curves to make it beautiful while making it more beautiful for people to walk on. And also the fiberglass is used to reinforce this concrete, and this design uses a lot of civil engineering skills, and I think this kind of tech project can be quite motivating for female students. Therefore, I recommend using this kind of project in educational content. Also, I have provided a lot of workshops about how to design classrooms. I think first thing to do is to set the learning objectives for every class. And I don't think gender inclusiveness should be the subject for every class, but maybe we need to include this in the education content, maybe every other week, so that we can make the classroom more inclusive rather than making it a chilly climate toward women. To make this happen, we or WISET Center, it should be developed in campus. The US colleges have a lot of these centers, but that is not the case in Korea. So we need to utilize these centers to develop more programs and share those programs. And we need to monitor the climate issues as well. The teaching pedagogies developed based on research should be used and more spread. And through these centers, we can also hold a workshop to share the ideas with other professors. In summary, I think we need an inclusive classroom, and to make classrooms more inclusive, we need to establish we or WISE Center at every campus. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. And next, we are going to invite Dr. Choi Young-shin, the co-founder and the CEO of NAMU. Let's invite her.
Hi, everyone. Great to meet you. My name is Choi Young-shin, and I'm happy to share with you some of also my personal experiences growing up as an engineer in Korea. A brief background about myself. I studied chemical and biomolecular engineering at Seoul National University, and then came to UC Berkeley for my PhD in chemical engineering as well. Afterwards, I co-founded a company now called NAMU that uses biotechnology to produce human milk-like ingredients, so we can make infant formula that is closest to human milk. And I'd love to share with you my personal stories. And unfortunately, my decision to pursue engineering was not at all related to engineering, actually. It was mostly due to my family and friends. So I'm the middle child of 3 daughters in my family. And I was the outgoing one. I was a tomboy of the family. So in a way, I was fulfilling the son sort of gender role in my family. And by deciding to pursue engineering, I think I was fulfilling a little bit of that. And also my closest friends at school, they went into engineering and science a lot. So it was very natural for me to choose engineering as my career path. However, in the midst of all the different engineering disciplines to choose from, I balked away from computer science or mechanical engineering because back then, even so, the gender imbalance was even stronger. So I did not want to be one of the 3 girls sitting in a room full of 100 guys, for example. So that's why I ended up in chemical engineering. Unfortunately, not because of my interest in chemical engineering, but more because I decided to go into engineering and picked a discipline that had the most number of girls, actually. And there, actually, I was very shocked by how the gender inequality caused a lot of uncomfortable situations for me during college. For example, once I did very well on a test, and I was made fun of by the guys for being very, very good on a test. I guess they were surprised that a girl could perform so well in engineering. And also during an internship during college at this chemical factory during college, me and my friend had to go there for about 2 weeks and to do an internship at the factory itself. Unfortunately, they had no female engineers on site, and they weren't able to provide us with the right size clothing. So we were walking around in baggy clothing and very big shoes and very big hats. So just, physically, we were in a very uncomfortable state. Additionally, we were put in a dormitory building that was full of men. So it was a full building full of men and just us 2 girls. So it was very, very uncomfortable. And because the gender imbalance was so strong in industry, that was one of my reasons to pursue my PhD and to further become a scientist. So that is how it affected my career. It's sort of ironic that I'm still in an industry. I don't know if you are familiar with the startup culture in Silicon Valley. So I am still now in a very gender imbalanced world. But I am very happy that I studied engineering during school because it's led me to this company and to create this awesome opportunity for me. So I've personally thought about some of the factors that have actually, might have made me more open to pursuing engineering for the sake of engineering. One is that exposure to more female engineers would have been a great start. Growing up, I actually never met female engineers until I went to college. And I believe we only had a couple of female professors there. So before then, I had no idea that female engineers could exist. And another sort of side anecdote for me, my mom is a vegetarian. My dad, he eats everything. And for the longest of time, I thought that women didn't eat, or it was not good of women to eat meat. Just from observing my parents, that's how strong, I guess, certain biases can be and stereotypes can be when you're little. So I think that exposure to more female figures in the STEM world could have really made it help. Another aspect is more engineering related activities in school. In school, except for the curriculums, you are free to do whatever I guess outside activities or group activities you're free to choose. But if we had more access to engineer-related activities such as designing some sort of computer programs or softwares, or making robots, if those types of activities were available in school, then I believe that could have gotten more interested in engineering from an earlier stage. And then thirdly, really the internship really was not happy for me. So I think definitely support from a lot of organizations to make that extra effort to bring in a lot of female engineers is very much needed. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing your experience. Due to the time limit, I think I'll need to skip myself. But based on, I have very similar experience with everyone here about self-confidence, and it took me 12 years to learn that I need to focus on what I like instead of what other people think about me. So with that, I'll move on to the next speaker. So 다음 발표자님은 그 삼성전자 부장님
Our next
정소영
speaker
부장님께서
is
들어오셨나요?
Principal
예.
Professional Jung So-hyun from Samsung Electronics. So if whenever you are ready, please start.
Yeah, thank you very much for. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Yeah, thanks for this opportunity to join this very meaningful forum. And my name is Sophie Chai and working at Samsung Electronics for mobile product strategy. So I am an engineer as a background. So I studied electronics engineering and then moved on to biomedical engineering for my master's and PhD degree. So after I joined the company, I worked on developing health products, including developing algorithm and sensors. And then I also worked on regulatory clearance and approval of those health products. And then now I'm in charge of broader product range, which include all the mobile products for North America. So what I want to talk about is how I had confidence as an engineer, where, most engineers are male engineers or students. I think it really mattered that I was always encouraged by the people surrounding me. And also, it was very personally important to me that, kind of getting encouraged at church, and pastors were very helpful to keep me in this confidence that I can continue to do whatever I'm supposed to do. And also my parents, they were very supportive all the time. And during my when I was like very young, like 5 years old or so, they never bought me a Barbie doll. They only bought me like blocks, Legos, and mini cars and such. So I can only, think about, how to build things or calculate things to build something that I want to have. And I think those efforts by parents were very helpful to naturally pursue engineering career. And the fact that even during the hard times, I was always encouraged to try again. That was very important. I think that should be very useful. They tend to lose confidence if they fail like a couple of times. But I think if any female student or any girl, if they find out what they want to do and continue, the world is, it's just so many things to do for female engineers. And then I see that, now seeing a lot of female CEOs in US markets, in many IT companies, that's very promising. So I think encouraging girls and students in universities that, they just need to decide to stick to what they want to do. And then, the professors and, friends, family, I think it takes some time that, people need to intentionally encourage these people. Like maybe we need to recognize that, female students are still like a kind of minor number than male students. Then maybe they need some intentional support. So that's what I think everybody needs to intentionally support, future female engineers until we see natural ratio of 50-50. I think it's a kind of social responsibility that we need to kind of make an effort together. Yeah, so that's my thought on how we can foster future female engineers. And thank you very much for listening to my story.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you.
스피커는 워싱턴
Our next speaker is Dr. Andrew Melchov, the professor from Washington University.
Yes, hello. Well, I was delighted to hear so many people talk about these topics that we're focused on, and I extracted a few things. One is that the laboratory experiments are not totally disconnected with the real world. We are, after all, interviewing the little girls and boys, and I think we're getting a realistic sense about what's going on in their mind. And some of the things that stood out to me about the speakers we just heard was the emphasis on wanting to learn and persistence, which Abby mentioned and several others did. I think being able to communicate to society, educational institutions, and others that, as Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, often says, instead of having kids think they have to be a know-it-all, we want to try to communicate to them that they should be a learn-it-all. That is the emphasis on, you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. What you want to be is the most curious person in the room, the person open to learning in the room. And that probably needs to be emphasized more. I have a little poster here that our research team put together when we go around Seattle to talk to educators. Hank, if you just bring it up, I don't know exactly how informative it will be, but if people can just see this, we bring around a poster to try to show educators and young children that what we want to do is try to do these 4 things: broaden beliefs about who belongs in the field of computer science and engineering. And one way you can do that is to redesign classrooms in ways that are more inviting to a diverse and broader set of people. That what's in the classrooms themselves, the things on the wall, whether you have E equals MC squared with a male on the wall and a bunch of computer parts laying around on the tables versus a different design, the room itself can communicate who belongs. That's the first cell. The second cell, which related to these ideas about having persistence and learning, was to challenge the idea that that you have fixed abilities, that they're immutable, that they're not malleable, but rather conversely, that they're plastic and flexible, persistence and hard work and wanting to learn pays off. And there's these stereotypes around, as I mentioned, that especially in computer science, more than, say, in language arts, or more than other fields, biology or psychology, people don't say in these other fields that somebody was a born psychologist, a born literary expert, but they tend to think this person's a math genius or this person's a computer scientist and they've been coding since they've been 11 years old or 9 years old. People think of it as more fixed ability. So we need to challenge that. That's the second box. The lower left box, just emphasizing or mentioning, is, and others have mentioned this about it being a helping profession, other speakers in this panel. It is important at all ages to show that computer science and engineering can make a difference for society. It is not just programming in your room to make robots move, but the things you do in engineering and computer science can help broad numbers of people. And in today's world, it may be one of the most direct ways of having the largest social impact. So for children and adults who want to make social impact, we want to show that that's tied to computer science and engineering rather than opposite it. And lastly, in the bottom right, positive role models were mentioned by many of the panelists. And a little twist I'd like to put on that is that we want to diversify the role models. It's not that the role models all need to be females in our experience. They need to be relatable to the young children and show the diversity rather than the narrowness of who is the image you have in your head as a good computer scientist or a good engineer. What we want to do is open that up and diversify the set of people who could be a good computer scientist and engineer, and that allows more children and more people to see that they could belong in the field and they could do it too. When we have a very narrow image of it, it tends to hurt. So we want to emphasize, yes, positive role models, but they can be of males and females and a variety of races and ethnicities and a variety of ages, and that will open things up. So those are just some few points that I wanted to add. And again, thank you for listening. I was fascinated to hear the other panelists who are directly in the field themselves. So thank you for including me in this.
Thank you, Professor. Now our last speaker is Professor Hwang Sun-hee from Hongik University. I found Professor Melchup's presentation very informative, and I also enjoyed the presentation by other speakers. Because of the time constraint, I had to summarize many of my presentation materials. So there are a lot of things I want to talk about. For years, I have done research about engineering and have met a lot of engineering female students. And many of the audience might agree with me. And I think there are some types in the female engineering students. One of the types is an island. Some female engineering students look like they are in their own island, which is, I would say, a bit unfortunate. And when I collected some data, I realized that at the time of admission, female engineering students seem to be very outperforming. So when I analyzed the data that I collected, especially I focused on the analysis of freshman data, I found no gender gap in self-efficacy and academic achievement. However, when they turn to the second grade, as presented by other panelists, we start to see a gender gap. in self-efficacy and academic accomplishment. I think deeper discussion and research into this phenomenon is required. And Professor Chung earlier mentioned about her experiences. I think the active support from her parent in the early development was very important. She said that she played with the mini cars and robots instead of Barbie girls thanks to the support of her parents. I think this was very lucky environment because most of the women find themselves in different environments in the early ages. Also, one of the things that I skipped in my presentations was that the engineering majors tend to have the external style thinking than at non-engineering majors. This means they want to engage in communication and interactions with others, and they prefer team projects and cooperation with others to doing it alone. I think this kind of style is very positive. And so what I would like to point out is that these kinds of characteristics of individual learners and students should also be taken into account. And those elements should be included in developing an educational content and curriculum. And this, I think, would require more exploration in this area and research. So if we make those efforts, I think in someday we can achieve the 50-50 gender ratio. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Because of the time constraints, and we can accommodate only one question. We collected questions from YouTube. So, well, actually, there are many people from industry. I'd like to ask this following question. So, actually, there is the gender stereotype in our job place. Actually, male-dominated organizations are found in many places. So, in this situation, how we can motivate ourselves? This is the question. Who can address this question? So, I'd like to invite the Dr. Shin. So could you address this question? How do you motivate yourself in a male-dominant environment?
Luckily, I am the CEO of the company that I work for right now, so I can directly influence our gender balance. That is actually quite a tough subject for us because we also don't want to put disadvantage towards women, for men as well. So I guess that has to do with our hiring culture. We always talk about how diversity is very important to us, and really try to think about what are the qualities of a certain applicant in advance before we see anyone, so that we are not biased in any way, and then have, based on those criteria that we set for ourselves before the interviews, try to gauge who might be the best candidate for us. But as a small company, that I agree is very hard to do, and oftentimes it has to be thought through in advance. And right now, we actually have an imbalance towards the other way. We actually have more women on our team than men. So we're actually trying hard to make, perhaps, if we're doing a team activity, not do too much team activities that would only entertain more the females of the group than the males, and try to incorporate everyone's interests. And yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. 네, 감사합니다.
Thank you so much. Well, time is limited, so we cannot accommodate further questions. Once again, I'd like to extend my sincere gratitude to speakers and panelists. Please give a big hands to our speakers and panelists. Thank you so much. So this is the end of today's program. And actually, our society is undergoing changes at unprecedented speed, and the world needs more science and technology engineering capabilities. Under these circumstances, the low entry of women into engineering field would be a huge loss for the whole society. And I believe today's forum is very meaningful in the sense that experts from both Korea and the United States have gathered to solve this problem. My special thanks go to every one of you. Thank you so much for joining today's forum.
We just leave.